Yo, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video. Today we are doing the melee DPS tier list for Heroic Plus. Now again, these are just predictions about what we think the Heroic Plus meta is going to be. And just a few quick disclaimers about this video before we jump into it. A couple things. One, I just want to be fully transparent here. The main reason we are making these videos is because we are hype about Heroic Plus. We're super excited about it and we want to keep the conversation going about it so that this becomes a priority for Classic, so that developers know that we like this, we love it, and this is how we want to see it play out. Another reason why we're doing this tier video is because a 5-man comp in a Heroic Plus setting just changes everything. You're playing with a lot less raid buffs, and so your comp has to be, kind of tailored to whoever you have with it. So certain classes that bring a bunch of buffs to the table all of a sudden jump up in value in a tier list because their buffs are being provided only by them. And so it's super fun to play out, how some of these classes might jump from like a C tier to an S tier and things like that. Another thing is we don't really expect Heroic Plus to be a key pushing thing. We're expecting it to just be one solo, just one difficulty, very approachable by the entire population of the Classic community. I have no doubts whatsoever that you could take 5 people and go in and kill a Heroic Plus with no issues at all, with just completely ignoring tier lists like this. Just any classes will do completely fine. The reason why we're doing this is really just because I want to talk about like what classes are going to be really valuable and really successful in a 5-man setting. And that's basically it. So please don't just not invite somebody to a Heroic Plus just because you said, or you saw them on this video and they ended up as a C tier DPS. Forget that crap. This is what we're doing. All right, well, let's jump right into it. First up, we're going to talk about Death Knights. Now, firstly, it's going to be Frosty K, which I think is just a chef's kiss A tier DPS. They are absolutely phenomenal through and throughout. They do really well, especially in phase 2, which is when Heroic Plus is going to be coming out. Frosty K is going to be in a great place. They're going to do really good damage. Some of the best damage in the entire Heroic Plus landscape is going to be coming from a Frosty K. My main concern with Frosty K is I feel like their buff that they bring just isn't good enough for me. They got Horn of Winter and you got Improved Icy Talons, which to me, like, it's just not enough. It's solid, but that's very minimal. So you're really only bringing them for their damage, which again is phenomenal damage coming from Frost, but that's basically it. As far as Unholy, I'm going to put in the S tier, as Unholy is going to be doing pretty much the same damage as Frost would. I think it would probably depend on which heroic it is that you're comparing the two in, as to which spec would do more damage. But I think Unholy is going to do great, especially right now with how we're seeing Corpse Explosion work, where we're not getting any CD reset off of exploding our ghoul or sacking our ghoul or anything like that. Because of that, that's just another boost to Unholy. Unholy's buff that they bring also is, of course, they bring Horn of Winter, but they're bringing Ebon Plaguebringer, which makes them good in any comp whatsoever. In fact, every spellcaster comp would likely want to sacrifice one of their spellcasters to also be an Unholy DK, which means an Unholy DK is basically a chameleon for any team, which is awesome. You don't have to tailor a team around an Unholy DK. They can fit into any puzzle whatsoever and do awesome damage. Another thing about Unholy is their Gargoyle going to be a really good cooldown on bosses, which right now I'm kind of anticipating somewhere between a 30-second to a 1-minute kill time on pretty much every boss. If that is the case, and if we do get cooldown reset after bosses, that makes Unholy DKs that much better. Even if we don't, they're still going to be phenomenal in those settings, especially if we're getting all of our cooldowns up on these said bosses. Unholy's going to do great, both single target and AoE. They're just very dominant in a dungeon setting. Now for Feral. Okay, firstly, to me, I think Feral's a bit underrated. I'm putting them in B tier, and I think most people would put them in a B tier. If you want to put Feral higher, I'm not gonna argue, but I wouldn't put him any lower than B tier. Problem with Feral is their damage is really good, But I feel like without good energy sustain, like without a good revitalize, or without like if you're chain pulling too quickly without downtime for energy to be stored up, Feral kind of might suffer a little bit. However, if you're making big, massive, like big AoE pulls, Feral jumps to like an S tier DPS there. With a Berserk going on a big AoE pull, they are potentially right up there with your Demo locks in terms of the highest damage output on a big AoE pack. They're absolutely insane. The buffs that they bring, they're going to bring 5% crit, you're going to bring a battle res, you're going to bring an innervate, and you're going to bring Gifts of the Wild. Mostly all we care about is the battle res there. The crit, the innervate, the Mark of the Wild is not a whole lot. They're not like big buffs to a party. They're nice, but they're not big. The battle res is potentially game saving. Because of that, hell, I could even put them in an A tier because of the battle res alone. Like, that is a phenomenal buff to bring. In fact, let's leave them there for now, and maybe I'll change my mind the further we go on into this video. Ret Paladin next. Ooh, now if you're familiar with my channel at all, you know that I typically will put something like a Ret Paladin like a D tier or a C tier. But this is the beauty of Heroic Plus, man. This changes everything. A class all of a sudden like a Ret Paladin, and you put them in a pure cleave, dungeon cleave setting, and with all the buffs that they bring that won't be covered by anyone else essentially, they're an A tier, a high A tier. In fact, I'd put them all the way at the top of A tier, potentially even like touching S tier, especially later into the game, especially in when they get to tier 10. Thing about Ret Paladin is they're bringing the 3% damage buff, they're bringing replenishment, they're bringing paladin buffs, they're bringing DSAC, they got freedom, you got sacrifice, you got bop, you got salvation. There is so much that a Ret Paladin can bring to the table for a 5-man comp. If you're about to face, like, potentially, if Heroic Plus is really challenging, this class is just ridiculous for it. Ridiculous. Now, if the content becomes really easy and snooze fest, they're still going to be phenomenal, but I feel like they kind of take a step back the easier that the content gets. Of course, we'll just have to wait and see how this plays out, but I think Ret is in a awesome place in the meta for Heroic Plus. Next up is Enhance. Now, if you've seen my healer video, you know how high I was on Resto Shaman. The same is basically true with Enhance, on top of the fact that Enhance was already an A tier, S tier DPS. You add on the fact that they are basically the only person who's bringing your Bloodlust. They're bringing 10% attack power. They're bringing Wind Fury Totem if you need it. They're bringing Enhancing Totems for the Strength of Earth. They are bringing so much damage. So much damage. The only downside to an Enhanced Shaman is mana sustain. If you can provide them a Judgment of Wisdom, or as long as you have potentially some solution to that, maybe you just make that guy pop mana potions, maybe you give him an Innervate, whatever the case may be, I don't think it's going to be an issue for long with a little bit of gear, especially considering the fact that Heroic Plus is coming out in Phase 2. I really don't foresee this being a big drawback. Enhance is just going to absolutely be dominant in a Heroic Plus setting. I'm not sure if any other DPS could even come close to the damage that Enhance is doing. I think that they will stand alone as a #1 across the entire board of every DPS. The only class potentially competing with them being potentially Demo Lock. Enhance brings so many buffs on top of all that damage. It's crazy to me. They're just ridiculously valuable and probably going to be the #1 most desired class to be brought in a Heroic Plus setting, especially considering that they can bring your spell haste totem. So if you don't need to drop Wind Fury, you can drop spell haste, or if you're in a full caster group, just drop spell haste. Like, they can fit any comp, which is also another good thing about Enhance. Okay, next up, we're going to talk about Rogue. Now, you may notice that I put the subtlety icon here. We're not putting them in B, but I didn't want to differentiate the two between combat and assassination. I feel like that wasn't the best evaluation of Rogue as a whole, especially considering that we now have this hybrid spec that's been manipulated and theory crafted in the Rogue Discord, mostly due to Simonize and his work. Big shout out to my boy. Rogue does ridiculously good damage with that spec, AoE. And then the plan with that spec is, in theory, to kind of change spec before a boss, get to Assassination, you have all your cooldowns back. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to pretend I know enough about Rogue to say, like, oh, you're going to have enough time to respec before a boss, or you're not going to have enough time to respec before a boss when we're speculating on how much our timer is going to be on a Heroic Plus setting. I think Rogues will know when it is best to be Assassination, when it is best to be Combat. Overall, you're usually going to be providing more damage for your party playing Combat, on top of the fact that Combat does really well in an AoE setting, more so than Assassination. Because of all those reasons, I'm actually going to put Rogue in A tier. Because I know that their damage is basically an S tier damage class, they just are really lacking in this buff department. I could even see myself putting them in B tier, but I'm going to put them at the bottom of A, which is potentially the lowest that Rogue has ever been in the entirety of the class for a dungeon setting. We're talking like Mythic Plus comparison. Rogue, I don't think has ever come close to like a B tier, and I think that they're actually like pushing it there just because they're missing so much like value for the rest of their party. Now, if you're raiding or you're doing a dungeon with a tank that is, say, a Druid or a Death Knight, the value of Rogue jumps up a lot because that Tricks of the Trade is much more helpful for those two tanks than it is for a Warrior or a Paladin who does much better in AoE tanking. So, of course, it depends on your group. No matter what, you're going to have a ton of success as a Rogue. Don't, please, guys, invite Rogues. If they want to come to your party, invite them. By all means, don't not invite them because you think they don't bring buffs. That's not what I'm trying to push. I'm not pushing that narrative here at all. Okay, God. Now that I got that out of the way, last class we're going to talk about is Warrior. Now, you can see the same thing with the Warrior here. I'm not going to differentiate between Arms and Fury, especially in Phase 2, knowing that Phase 2 is a really tough line to draw as between which spec is better. A lot of cases, it depends on the fight. A lot of cases, it depends on do you actually need the physical damage buff that Arms brings, and it depends on the gear that you have available to you. Typically, you're probably just going to be running Fury in any Heroic Plus setting. And I think Fury overall is a B tier. Now, no surprise here. I'm kind of low on Warriors. I've always been low on Warriors. But again, I just can't bring myself to put them too much higher. On top of the fact that their damage is actually probably lower than all these other classes that I've listed, except maybe Feral. They might do more than Feral, depending on the dungeon and depending on the gear. And they might do more than a Ret depending on the dungeon, depending on the gear, especially depending on the dungeon, because Ret does so well in these undead dungeons where they can Holy Wrath and etc. I think Fury just is missing like a buff. They bring 5%, they bring Battle Shout, and they have Shattering Throw, but you won't ever really need that in a dungeon setting. So I feel like they're missing a lot for me. So because of that, I just can't put Warriors like much higher. That's just as high as I can go on them. And that's it, guys. So that's it for Melee. We've covered every Melee here. I didn't feel like I needed to go into Blood DK at all or anything else. Next video is going to be Casters. And that's the last tier list that we're going to do for Heroic Plus in terms of all the specs in the game. Thank you so much for your support and watching and liking and commenting. Please, guys, let's keep talking about Heroic Plus. I really do think this is one of the coolest new features that will be brought to Classic Wrath. And we can make this great as long as we keep talking about it, guys. Seriously. All right, love you guys. Peace.